Hello. In this module, we are going to discuss maintenance and generalization of skills taught within staff training. And I think this topic is incredibly important because really nothing you've learned in the previous modules makes a bit of difference if you cannot set up conditions that will promote generalization and maintenance. If you don't do this, if you aren't able to do this, you really can end up just wasting your time because the effects of your training can be very short term. We're going to start this module with an article by Gianomis and Sturmy, and this is a review article in which the authors searched the literature for articles about staff training, and then they looked at what types of generalization procedures were used within those studies. When they did this, they looked at it from the perspective of the classic and seminal Stokes and Baer article, which is called An Implicit Technology of Generalization. Next, we'll have an article by Bolton and Mayer, and this study focuses on generalization of skills taught in analog settings. In other words, that's when you teach a skill in one setting, for instance, an empty classroom, and then the skill needs to be actually displayed in another setting. That's a very common way to provide training, and while there are certainly reasons to do that, it also can hinder generalization. So it's very important in that situation that you provide training that will promote generalization. Then we'll have an article by Ducharme and Williams in which a type of pyramidal training was used. And I think you will remember what pyramidal training is from an earlier module in this course. That's when individuals are trained and then they go on to train others. So that's certainly a big part of this article. But I think something that's very important as well in this article is that they used what's called general case training, and that's essentially the idea that they used multiple examples, also known as multiple exemplars, when they were providing training. That's so important because usually we're training people who will work with multiple individuals who have a wide variety of skill sets. If we don't set up our training in a way that prepares individuals for those multiple types of situations they can be in, we can really find that our training was not very effective or useful. One thing I wanted to mention is that when I was looking for articles for this course, one thing that I was very surprised by and disappointed by is that there are a lot of articles in which the training was always only shown to be effective in a very specific role play situation. In other words, the training was not effective or demonstrated in the setting where it actually needed to be used. And a lot of times it wasn't even provided to an individual with a disability or who otherwise needed behavior analytic services. And, I do think studies like that have limited benefit. They can be very clean and well designed. They can be a good first step in assessing the effectiveness of an intervention. But, real intervention is messy. And we need to see if our training strategies can hold up in the real world. So one thing I really appreciated about this article is that they did examine the effects of this training on the real world. We already discussed self-monitoring in a previous module, but I wanted to come back to it in the generalization module because I think self-monitoring, just based on the research and based on my own personal experience, it's one of the best ways to promote generalization and maintenance. In the article by Connard et al., we'll look at durability, which really is just another way to describe maintenance. The authors here conducted a review, and this is very similar to the article by Gianomis and Sturmy. They conducted a review of the literature, except in this article, instead of looking at tactics for generalization, they looked at tactics regarding maintenance. I hope you'll especially study the tables in this article. I think they do a great job of outlining the different tactics that are available to us when we're promoting generalization and maintenance. Okay, and then moving on, we'll have an article by Coles and Blunden. And this article is a little older, but I chose it because, well, First of all, I chose it because there's unfortunately not a lot available on this topic, but I also really liked the way this article talked about the idea that, the first intervention they provided, it helped the individuals being served, but then that wasn't enough to maintain the staff providing the intervention in that way. And so they went back and did a second study where they introduced procedures to promote maintenance this time. And I think very importantly, they involved staff at all levels to promote maintenance. And then the last article in this module will provide an example of a staff training intervention that appears to have maintained for 30 years. Now, keep in mind this is not an empirical study. That's why I said appears to have maintained for 30 years. However, these articles do make some nice observations that I think you might find useful when you're designing your own training procedures. And, even when we don't have a lot to look at in terms of empirical studies, something like this can be a good starting place. But we do need to make sure that when we are actually working in our own service setting, that we measure the effects of our training and also the maintenance of our training. We want to make sure that our trainings are not only effective, but also that they maintain over time. And then the final activity in this module is your final project for the course. If you've not already started, please be sure that you start right away because we really want you to all do well. This project will take quite a bit of time. It's worth quite a number of points, and waiting to the last minute would be a huge mistake, especially because you need to recruit some helpers for the video portion of this project. As you prepare assignment, please be sure to apply what you've learned throughout the entire course, including this module. And as always, please be sure to let us know if you have any questions. I hope you enjoy this module.